Ready? This is May 29th, 2026, and I've been posting these videos as a form of therapy in my recovery from the trauma of watching my little brother, Paul Cairns, with Down syndrome, 64 with Down syndrome, be locked up by the British Columbia New Democratic Party government, David Eby as leader, Nikki Sharma as Attorney General, and Sheila Malcolmson as the responsible Minister for Social Development and Poverty Reduction. The government locked Paul away when I complained to the police about when I discovered a secret and what I alleged to be a fraudulent and forged power of attorney the government created to give Paul the COVID-19 shot. I didn't object to the COVID-19 shot, but I did object to the secret guardianship agreement where the government appointed my then 82-year-old Catholic nun sister 4,000 kilometers away in Ontario as Paul's guardian. She had moved out when Paul was born. She had only met him a few times over the course of his life, where my sisters and I and my mother had cared for Paul on weekends and holidays. Paul only lived at the group home during the week, as long as he had family around, but eventually everyone passed away except for me. I was allowed 2 visits a week with Paul, one at the group home and one at my home. So when the government found out I had complained to the Burnaby RCMP about this fraudulent forged power of attorney, they ordered the nun to do something. And what she did through her lawyers, she had 2 law firms working for her, a law firm in Ottawa and a law firm, probably the biggest law firm in Vancouver, Borden Ladner Gervais. She decided through her lawyers to terminate all my visits with Paul, so that left him locked away in Burnaby in his group home. So they locked Paul away for 588 days. I did everything legally that I could think of. I complained to the Human Rights Tribunal, and the government ordered them to slow walk my complaint, which they did. They didn't even contact me till after Paul died. I went through the Supreme Court of British Columbia. I tried to restore Paul's visits. I tried to be appointed as guardian, but nothing that I did was successful. So I got an email from my sister's Vancouver lawyer on April 15th of 2024 saying that Paul had had a stroke. So what had happened is Paul had actually had a stroke on April 13th, but my sister, the nun, left him alone in the hospital for 2 days. She didn't contact me. And when he didn't die, then she flew in and she allowed me a 10-minute per day visit with Paul. While I was waiting in the hospital, I would wait in the hospital for 10 to 12 hours a day, every day that Paul was there. And on April 21st, I got a telephone call from a staff sergeant at the Burnaby RCMP saying that they had been ordered by their Ottawa Oversight Agency to reopen the investigation into the fraudulent and forged power of attorney. And I went to court the next morning asking the judge to suspend the nun's guardianship over Paul, pending the RCMP investigation, but we didn't get on. And when I got back to the hospital, it appeared to me that they had killed Paul. All his medical supports, including his oxygen mask. Up to that point, he appeared to be recovering remarkably well. I brought him a book. He grabbed the book from my hand, turned the pages perfectly, looked at the pictures perfectly, made good eye contact with me. When I said my name, he grabbed my hand and squeezed it so hard I thought he was going to crush it. So he was really recovering very well. But as soon as the nun found out that the RCMP had contacted me, Paul had to die. And when I got back to the hospital after appearing in court, all his medical supports had been removed. And he had had an oxygen mask with a ventilator that had been removed. And he was lying completely still. I think he was dead. Although when I walked in the room, she wouldn't look me in the eye. She just said to me, "Say goodbye to Paul. He's dying," through gritted teeth. but she wouldn't look me in the eye, and she wouldn't let me near his head. He also had a wound on his head that was bleeding. So I don't know. He may have suffered some kind of injury at the group home, and maybe it was not a stroke. But at that point, on April 21st, April 22nd of 2024, he appeared to have been killed. I had complained to the nurse on the ward that he was over-sedated. There was no need to sedate him. He wasn't in any pain at all. He was struggling to recover, and he looked so frightened. I could see that he was so frightened. He didn't want to die. He couldn't have consented to medical assistance in dying. He couldn't have consented. He did not have he had the mental capacity of a 15-month-old baby. He could not have consented to being euthanized, but that's what they did. And I complained to the Burnaby RCMP. I said, treat his death as suspicious. But I never, after Paul died, the nun proceeded with an application to have me designated a vexatious litigant. That's a very rare and unusual designation that takes away all of my access to the courts in Canada. The access that any human being on earth would has been taken away from me. They had a 4-day hearing with 4 full days. I had 2 certificates from my doctors. I had a heart attack in 2016, and I produced to the judge 2 certificates saying that I couldn't appear in court for longer than 2 hours per day, but the judge didn't care. Her name was Judith E. Hoffman, and she just barreled right through on 2 full days. So after my 2 hours were up, I got up and left, and in my absence, she designated me permanently for life a vexatious litigant, which is a horrible stain on my reputation. So after Paul died, I started to become aware of the euthanasia in Canada, and I was shocked. I'd been so preoccupied with trying to restore his visits, I had not been paying attention. But in February of 2015, and this is really important to note, the Supreme Court of Canada unanimously and anonymously reversed an earlier decision where they had said that it was not in the public interest for doctors to euthanize people in Canada. A woman named Sue Rodriguez, who had multiple sclerosis, was put forward by a member of parliament named Sven Robinson, who was the first New Democratic Party socialist member of parliament. And I know him very well. I worked on his campaign. I used to be a socialist too. And he had really promoted getting her killed by a doctor. But the Supreme Court of Canada said no, it was not in the public interest. And then a few years later, in 2015, a group called Death with Dignity, as if only being killed by a doctor can be a dignified death. So all of our hero soldiers that died, the 100,000 Canadian soldiers that died in the 20th century, did not die with dignity. It's the most disgusting premise you could possibly imagine. You know, it's like that Dylan Thomas poem, do not go gently into that good night. Fight, fight, fight against the dying of the light. It's disgusting. These people are disgusting ghouls. Anyways, what I discovered is that the Supreme Court of Canada in February of 2015 anonymously and unanimously, usually court decisions have judges' names attached to them. And sometimes there's dissenting judges, but there were no dissenting judges. And the architect of that decision, which reversed the earlier decision and allowed for Canadians to be killed by any medical practitioner, any doctor, any nurse, was a judge named Beverly McLaughlin. And this is important. She was at that time, February of 2015, she was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada in this decision, which basically reversed 40,000 years of human civilization, including Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. I started my studies in anthropology and archaeology, and Neanderthals and Homo sapiens did not kill their elderly, sick, and dying and disabled members of their community. As a matter of fact, saber-toothed tigers did not kill their elderly, sick, and disabled members of their society. And they know that because there are skeletons that show healing of catastrophic injuries. So February 15th of 2015, February of 2015, the Supreme Court of Canada reversed its earlier decision and allowed for people to be killed by doctors, by medical practitioners. And they did the most bizarre, ridiculous stunt and gave Canada 12 months, 1 year to come up with to amend the criminal code, where what previously was the most serious offense, a hanging offense in the criminal code, first-degree murder, now became legal. And this is something that it's never been able to be done before. So they gave the Canadian government 12 months to come up with a system of making sure that people were not killed in a way that was not within the limits of the law, that was done in a legal way, that didn't take advantage of them and didn't coerce them. And the Canadian government came up with a system they call MAiD, Medical Assistance in Dying. Well, for starters, if you're in law, you know that words matter. The word medical is from the Greek verb to heal. It means to heal, and you do not heal anyone by killing them. So medical practitioners, doctors, any old doctor or nurse, all they need to do is put their signature on a piece of paper. It takes 2 signatures and that of the patient, and the patient can be killed. And they're harvesting organs of these patients. Every nightmarish scenario that you could imagine has transpired in Canada. It has exploded. And of course, the right to die inevitably becomes the duty to die. There's only 4 jurisdictions in the world, 4 countries that allow euthanasia that I'm aware of. I think that California might now also allow euthanasia, but that's Switzerland, Spain, the Netherlands, and Canada. But Canada's by far the worst. And there's a story this week that's been going around of a doctor who met a patient outside of a Tim Hortons in London, Ontario, and he signed the piece of paper that allowed for this patient, and then he drove him to the place where the patient was killed, which I've heard was a coroner's office. He was actually killed in the coroner's office, and he was sanctioned with 6 months of being under supervision for something that would have resulted him being hanged up to 1976 as first-degree murder. And the point I wanted to make today is that we could always kill people, elderly, ill, dying people. We could always kill them, and quickly, but we didn't do it because there's certain aspects of society. The reason that weak and vulnerable people can associate with stronger people is because they know they're not going to be killed. But people in Canada don't know that anymore. They might think there's many people that have suicidal tendencies, and they're afraid that if they go to their doctor, they'll be convinced to be killed. Or they might have a bad day and they'll want to be killed. Suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. But the point that I wanted to make today, and it's late, I'm in the middle of my 10,000 steps. I've walked 253 kilometers this May. But the point that I wanted to make today, and I don't know if I'm making it clearly enough, is the reason we do not kill people even though it seems to make perfect sense, just like Hitler thought it made perfect sense. Hitler killed every sick, elderly, and dying person. He cleared out the hospitals and the sanatoriums in Germany before he killed 350,000 people by gassing them. And people thought, oh, this is the modern way. No, it's not the modern way. And the reason why there's a red circle, or a red line, that we do not cross and we do not kill people is because people behave in bad ways. You don't structure laws and legislation on the basis of people acting honestly and fairly and altruistically. Laws are for when people are acting bad in ways that are destructive to society. They create guardrails that prevent bad behavior. So the Canadian government came up with this MAiD system, which has resulted in horrific scenarios like a woman, an 84-year-old woman, going to Vancouver General Hospital emergency last year with a sore back. And they didn't even ask her what was wrong with her. They just offered her, they've said, oh, we've decided to offer you MAiD. And don't ever use that propaganda word. It makes me, it's like the N word. Anyways, the reason we don't kill people is because it can't be done in a way that doesn't take advantage of weak and vulnerable people. And right now, people are actually profiting off the harvesting of organs from these poor citizens that are extrajudicially executed by lethal injection in Canada. I call it EBLIC, not MAiD. So laws have to be structured in such a way that they don't take into account people acting on their best behavior. It's people acting out of their worst impulses and bad behavior, and protecting the vulnerable and the innocent. And there has never been a system in the history of the world where killing people worked. It could be that you could set up a system of guardrails that would protect people from being taken advantage of by being killed. And the 3-point system that I give for people, if you want to argue about why euthanasia should not be legal, is number one, you cannot give informed consent to being killed because we don't know what death is. We don't know if it's going to heaven or hell, or if it's just you ceasing to exist, or if it's reincarnation. We don't know. Secondly, it's permanent and irreversible, and that's why Canada abolished capital punishment, hanging, in 1976 for civilians, and in 1999. Only 26 years ago, hanging was abolished for military people. And the third point is what I've just said, is that there's a false thesis of implementation. So the Supreme Court have kind of thought, oh, we know what the problem is, why we shouldn't euthanize people. It's because there's not a system set up of guardrails to protect people from being coerced to being killed. We'll just instruct the Canadian government to come up with such a system. When in the 40,000 history of human civilization, no such system has ever been developed or ever can be developed, because human beings being what they are. So that's it for tonight. I love you all. Take care.